Despite being looked down on, he cared for the old horse with love. And when the animal saved him in his darkest moment, everyone was left speechless. Dawn broke reluctantly over Sweetwater, Texas, painting the sky in hesitant strokes of amber and pink. Elijah Walker had been awake for an hour already, watching that slow transformation from the small window of his quarters at the back of the Thompson Ranch stables. The faded photograph of his parents rested in his calloused hands, his mother's gentle smile and his father's proud stance, both forever frozen in time, 2 years gone after a semi-truck jackknifed on Interstate 20. Another day, Elijah whispered to their image, a ritual that had become both prayer and promise. At 19, he stood alone in the world, his broad shoulders already carrying the invisible weight of solitude. The stable clock read 5:30 when he stepped outside, the air still holding the night's coolness before the Texas summer would burn it away. He moved with quiet efficiency, knowing the routine by heart: feed the horses first, muck the stalls, haul fresh hay, all before the real cowboys arrived at 7. By 6:45, sweat already darkened his shirt as he emptied the last wheelbarrow of manure onto the compost pile. The sound of approaching trucks announced the arrival of the other ranch hands. Elijah straightened his back, bracing himself for another day of sideways glances and barely disguised contempt. "Well, look at that. Boy's already neck-deep in shit this morning," called Donnie, the oldest of the Thompson cowboys, as he climbed down from his truck. "Born for this kind of work, ain't ya?" The others laughed, gathering their gear from truck beds. "Cleaning manure's in your DNA, right, boy?" added Mike, a wiry cowboy with perpetual tobacco stain on his lower lip. Elijah kept his expression neutral, remembering his mother's voice in his head. A former elementary school teacher, Sarah Walker had possessed quiet dignity that somehow seemed louder than any shout. "Words are seeds, son," she would say, her hands gentle on his shoulders. "Plant them with wisdom, for you will harvest what you sow." So he planted silence instead, focusing on the work of his hands rather than the poison from theirs. Richard Thompson arrived at 9 in his gleaming black Silverado, dust billowing behind him as he roared up the gravel drive. The ranch owner stepped out in polished boots and a crisp button-down shirt, surveying his kingdom with the confidence of a man who had inherited wealth and mistook it for personal achievement. "Walker!" Thompson barked, gesturing toward the breeding barn. "Get in here." Elijah followed, his footsteps measured and careful. Inside, Thompson pointed to a small streak of dried mud on the otherwise immaculate floor. "You call this clean? Do it again." "Yes, sir," Elijah replied, even as he noticed Thompson stepping past the similar mud marks left by the boots of the white ranch hands without comment. "And when you're done, fix that loose board in the third stall. Sanchez was supposed to do it yesterday, but apparently that was too complicated for him." "Yes, sir." As Thompson turned to leave, he paused, eyeing Elijah critically. "You're getting paid fair, boy. I expect the work to match." Fair was a stretch. Elijah earned less than half what the white cowboys made, despite working longer hours and handling the most physically demanding tasks. But jobs were scarce in Sweetwater for a young black man with only a high school diploma, especially one without family connections to vouch for him. The memory of his father surfaced unexpectedly. John Walker standing in this very barn years ago, showing a much younger Elijah how to approach a nervous mare. "Horses don't lie, son," he'd said, his voice low and melodic. "They carry truth in their eyes. Learn to see it, and you'll never be fooled by any man." His father had been respected as a horse trainer before the accident, even by men like Thompson, but respect hadn't translated to equal pay or advancement opportunities, something John Walker had accepted with the same quiet dignity he'd passed to his son. 10 miles away at the prestigious Sanford Ranch, a very different scene was unfolding. Thunder, a once celebrated Appaloosa stallion, was living up to his name as he crashed against the walls of his isolated paddock, eyes wild with fear and rage. "Get back!" shouted a handler as the horse lunged toward the fence, teeth bared in a primal threat display. "That devil nearly took my arm off yesterday." Thunder pawed the ground, nostrils flared, the scars on his back telling the story of failed attempts to break him. Once a champion rodeo horse, he had witnessed the violent death of his owner, Jake Miller, during a competition in San Antonio. The stallion had reared when a bull broke through a barrier, throwing Miller directly into the path of the enraged animal. Since that day 8 months ago, no trainer had been able to approach Thunder without risking serious injury. "That animal should have gone to the glue factory months ago," Richard Thompson regularly commented when meeting David Sanford, the neighboring owner at the local bar. Today was no exception as the two men shared afternoon whiskeys at the Rusty Spur. "Perhaps," Sanford replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "but his bloodline is gold. If only someone could calm him enough for collection." "Blood means nothing if you can't get near enough to use it," Thompson scoffed. "It's a waste keeping a beast like that eating your expensive hay." Back at Thompson Ranch, Elijah was finishing repairs on the stall when he overheard two cowboys discussing Thunder. "Sanford's bringing in some hotshot trainer from Oklahoma next week," said one. "Betting he lasts about 5 minutes before that crazy horse puts him in the hospital too." "Shame," replied the other. "That Appaloosa was something special before he went mad, worth a fortune in stud fees alone." Elijah kept his head down, but his ears open. He'd seen Thunder once, about a year before the accident when his father had taken him to watch a competition. The stallion had moved with breathtaking power and precision, a perfect partnership with his rider. The memory of such nobility reduced to fearful aggression stirred something deep in Elijah's chest. The afternoon drifted toward evening, the Texas sky deepening to a fierce crimson as Elijah loaded the last of the hay bales. The physical labor was punishing, but he welcomed the way it emptied his mind. Sometimes, in these moments of exhaustion, he could almost forget the hollow space where his parents had been. Richard Thompson's voice cut through his reverie. "Walker, in my office." Elijah followed Thompson to the small building that served as the ranch's administrative center, aware of the cowboy's eyes tracking him, curiosity mingled with schadenfreude. "Payday," Thompson announced, settling behind his desk, visibly buzzed from his afternoon whiskeys. He smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. Elijah stood quietly, waiting for his weekly envelope, the meager sum that kept a roof over his head and food in his stomach, if little else. "Not today, boy," Thompson said, his smile widening. "Today I've got something better for you." The cowboys had gathered outside the office window, their expressions suggesting they were in on whatever was coming. "Sanford owes me a favor and agreed to give you something of value." Thompson pushed a paper across the desk, an official transfer of property document. Elijah read it, confusion spreading across his features. "Congratulations," Thompson continued, not bothering to hide his amusement. "You're now the owner of Thunder. Perhaps you'll understand each other. Two untamable savages." Laughter erupted from outside as the cowboys pressed closer to the window. "You've got 1 month to tame him," Thompson explained, leaning back in his chair. "If you succeed, you can sell him and keep the money. If not, well, the glue factory's always looking for raw materials." The next day, a small convoy of vehicles made its way to Sanford Ranch. Thompson drove his Silverado with Elijah in the passenger seat, followed by 3 trucks filled with curious cowboys, all eager to witness what they expected would be a spectacular failure, or better yet, a serious injury. David Sanford met them at the isolated paddock where Thunder was kept, 100 yards from the main stables. "You sure about this, Richard?" Sanford asked, eyeing Elijah with something between curiosity and concern. "That horse has put 3 men in the hospital." "The boy thinks he's special with animals," Thompson replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Time he learned how the real world works." From inside the paddock, Thunder watched the gathering with suspicious eyes, his powerful body tense with readiness. The stallion's coat gleamed midnight black with the distinctive Appaloosa white-spotted pattern across his hindquarters. Scars crisscrossed his back from failed attempts to ride him, each one a testament to human cruelty disguised as training. "He's all yours, boy," Thompson gestured toward the paddock. "Show us how it's done." One of the cowboys pushed Elijah forward. "Yeah, horse whisperer. Whisper to that demon." Elijah ignored them all, studying Thunder from a distance. The horse's body language screamed fear and defensiveness, not aggression for its own sake. This wasn't a crazy horse. This was a traumatized animal protecting itself the only way it knew how. "You've got an audience, Walker," Thompson called. "Don't keep us waiting." Instead of approaching the fence immediately, Elijah sat down in the grass several yards away. The cowboys looked at each other in confusion. "What the hell is he doing?" one muttered. "Maybe praying for his life," another answered, prompting more laughter. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn book of Psalms that had belonged to his mother. Opening it to a page marked with a faded ribbon, he began to read aloud in a low, melodic voice that carried on the evening air. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound, his aggressive stance shifting subtly. The stallion took a few steps closer to the fence, muscles still tense, but head slightly lowered. "Look at that," whispered one of the younger cowboys. "The animal's actually listening." "Coincidence," another grumbled. "Just wait till the kid tries to touch him." But Elijah made no move toward the horse. He continued reading, his voice maintaining the same calm rhythm, creating a bubble of tranquility that seemed at odds with the tension surrounding them. After nearly an hour, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Elijah finally closed the book. He stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and simply walked away without looking back at Thunder. Before he was out of sight, however, the stallion did something that stunned the onlookers. Thunder nickered softly, a questioning sound that seemed to ask why the young man was leaving, a sound no one had heard from the traumatized animal in months. "You saw that?" one of the cowboys murmured to Thompson. "The horse didn't try to attack him." Thompson's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening as he watched Elijah walk back to the truck. "Coincidence," he replied dismissively. "Just wait until he tries to ride the animal. He'll need a coffin, not a prayer book." "Coincidence," Thompson replied dismissively. "Just wait until he tries to ride the animal. He'll need a coffin, not a prayer book." The drive back to Thompson Ranch passed in tense silence. Elijah stared out the window, his mind still with the stallion whose eyes had reflected something beyond fear. A recognition, perhaps, of shared pain. Behind them, the convoy of cowboys followed, their earlier mockery now tempered by confusion at what they'd witnessed. The next morning dawned clear and hot, typical Texas summer asserting itself with unforgiving brightness. Elijah rose before sunrise as usual, his movements automatic as he tended to his regular duties. Throughout the morning, he felt eyes following him. The cowboy's curiosity had shifted from anticipation of his failure to something more uncertain. By midday, Thompson emerged from his office, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He handed Elijah a worn manila envelope containing the official transfer documents. "Your property awaits, boy," he announced loud enough for the nearby workers to hear. "I've arranged for you to have evenings free for your special project." His emphasis made clear this wasn't generosity, but expectation of spectacular failure. Donnie, the veteran cowboy, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You got yourself a death wish, Walker? That horse ain't just wild. He's broken in the head." Elijah tucked the envelope into his back pocket. Maybe he just needs someone to listen. "Listen?" Mike laughed. "To what? His plans to stomp you into the ground?" The laughter that followed carried Elijah through the remainder of his workday, a familiar soundtrack to his existence at Thompson Ranch. As the sun began its westward descent, he finished his chores and headed toward his quarters to retrieve something. Inside the small room, he knelt beside his bed and pulled out a weathered guitar case. The instrument inside had belonged to his father, a simple dreadnought with nicks and scratches that told the story of Sunday afternoons on their modest porch, his father's fingers coaxing blues melodies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. When Elijah arrived at Sanford Ranch that evening, he was surprised to find a small gathering of cowboys already there, lawn chairs set up at a safe distance from Thunder's paddock. "Got front row seats to the show," one called out, raising a beer in mock salute. Thunder stood at the far end of the enclosure, ears pinned back, eyes tracking Elijah's approach with predatory focus. The stallion's muscles rippled beneath his spotted coat, tensed for fight or flight, mostly fight, if his history was any indication. Elijah ignored the spectators and settled himself in the same spot as the previous day, cross-legged on the ground with his guitar across his lap. He began to tune the instrument, each note hanging in the evening air. "He brought a serenade," one of the cowboys hooted. "Sing him a love song, Walker." Thunder's ears flicked forward at the sound of the guitar, his aggressive stance momentarily interrupted by curiosity. Elijah began to play, not a song exactly, but a gentle, meandering blues progression that his father had often used as a foundation for improvisation. His fingers remembered what his mind sometimes forgot: the specific pressure needed on each string, the subtle vibrato that made notes seem to breathe. As the melody unfolded, Elijah kept his eyes down, focused on the guitar rather than the horse. This wasn't about dominance or control. It was about offering companionship without demand. The cowboys' jeers gradually subsided, replaced by a puzzled silence as they watched Thunder's behavior shift. The stallion took a few tentative steps toward the fence, still wary but no longer projecting aggressive intent. From the shadow of a nearby stable, a figure observed with particular interest. Rose Thompson, Richard's 22-year-old daughter home for summer break from veterinary school, watched Elijah's unorthodox approach with growing fascination. She pulled her phone from her pocket and began to record discreetly. After nearly 45 minutes of playing, Elijah finally looked up. Thunder had moved to within 15 feet of the fence, his head lowered not in submission but in what appeared to be attentiveness. Their eyes met across the distance, the young man who had lost everything, and the animal who had witnessed unspeakable trauma. Elijah ended his music with a soft, lingering chord that seemed to hang in the air between them. Without speaking, he packed up his guitar, stood slowly, and departed just as he had the previous day. And just like before, Thunder issued a soft nicker as he walked away, a sound that seemed to puzzle the stallion himself. The next afternoon at Thompson Ranch, whispers followed Elijah as he worked. "Heard he just played guitar to that devil horse. Ain't gonna tame nothing with music. Thompson's gonna laugh all the way to the bank when that horse stomps him flat." By his third visit, Elijah had established a pattern. He arrived just before sunset, settled in his now familiar spot, and offered Thunder his presence without pressure. This time, he brought an apple which he cut into quarters with his pocket knife. After his customary reading from his mother's psalm book, he carefully placed the apple pieces on the middle rail of the fence and retreated to his position. The gathered cowboys, fewer now as the novelty began to wear off, watched with skeptical expressions as Thunder regarded the offering from a distance. "That ain't horse training," muttered one. "That's just feeding a wild animal. Makes him more dangerous, not less." For nearly an hour, the apple pieces remained untouched as Elijah continued reading aloud, his voice a gentle current in the gathering dusk. Then, with deliberate caution, Thunder approached the fence. His nostrils flared as he sniffed the fruit, ears moving back and forth as if scanning for danger. With delicate precision that belied his size, Thunder picked up an apple piece with his lips. He retreated several steps before chewing and swallowing, then returned for another piece. The process repeated until all 4 quarters were gone. Word of Elijah's unusual approach began to spread beyond the immediate circle of ranch hands. By his 5th visit, Thunder was waiting at the fence when he arrived, a development that caused even the most skeptical observers to exchange glances of grudging curiosity. On the 7th visit, Elijah brought another apple, but this time he didn't place the pieces on the fence. Instead, after their usual routine of music and reading, he stood slowly and approached the fence for the first time, holding a piece of apple in his open palm. A tense silence fell over the small group of observers. Thunder's body language shifted immediately. Head up, ears alert, muscles tensed. But he didn't retreat. "He's gonna lose those fingers," whispered one of the cowboys. Elijah stopped several feet from the fence, arm extended, palm flat with the apple piece resting on it. "It's your choice," he said softly to Thunder. "Everything is always your choice." Minutes passed in breathless silence. Then, With excruciating slowness, Thunder extended his neck toward Elijah's hand. His warm breath huffed against Elijah's palm before velvet lips delicately lifted the apple piece. From her hidden observation point, Rose Thompson inhaled sharply, her phone capturing the milestone moment. She had attended 2 years of veterinary school focusing on equine behavior, and what she was witnessing contradicted everything her professors had taught about handling problem horses. There was no pressure, no dominance, no submission, just mutual acknowledgement between two sentient beings. News of this development reached Richard Thompson quickly. The following morning, he waited until Elijah finished mucking stalls before approaching, his face set in lines of irritation. "This isn't what we agreed to," Thompson said, arms crossed over his chest. "Feeding treats to a horse isn't training." Elijah straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "You said I had a month. It's been a week." "Any fool can feed an animal," Thompson continued as if Elijah hadn't spoken. "I want to see that boy mounted and under control. That's what real training looks like." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rose's vintage Jeep. She parked and approached the two men, her expression carefully neutral. "Dad," she greeted Thompson with a brief nod before turning to Elijah. "I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. I'm Rose Thompson." Elijah nodded respectfully, aware of the complicated dynamics at play. "Ma'am." "Rose, this isn't your concern," Thompson began, but his daughter continued undeterred. "Actually, it is. What you're doing with Thunder is fascinating," she said directly to Elijah. "I'm studying equine behavior at UT Austin, and I've never seen an approach quite like yours." Thompson's face darkened. "This isn't a science project, Rose. It's a business arrangement." "I'm not doing anything special," Elijah responded quietly, addressing Rose rather than her father. "I'm just giving him time and space to decide if I can be trusted." "That's exactly what makes it special," Rose insisted. "Most trainers force horses to accept human dominance. You're offering partnership instead." Thompson made a dismissive sound. "Partnership? With an animal? This is exactly the kind of nonsense they're filling your head with at that liberal university." Before Rose could respond, one of the ranch hands called for Thompson's attention regarding a delivery. With a final warning glance at both of them, he stalked away. "Don't mind him," Rose said once her father was out of earshot. "He's from a different generation of horse people. Break them or kill them was pretty much the philosophy." Elijah nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden alliance being offered. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Rose said, pulling out her phone. "I've been documenting your sessions with Thunder. The progress you're making? It's remarkable. Would you mind if I continued? It could be valuable research." Elijah hesitated. Attention had never brought him anything but trouble, especially in a town like Sweetwater, where racial dynamics remained firmly entrenched in past centuries. "I'm not trying to be in anyone's spotlight," he said carefully. "I just want to help that horse." Rose studied him for a moment. "Sometimes helping one horse means changing how people think about all horses. Think about it?" That evening, Elijah arrived at Thunder's paddock to find a larger crowd than usual. Word had spread about the feeding milestone, attracting curious onlookers from beyond the immediate ranch community. He felt his shoulders tense at the increased attention. Thunder seemed equally disturbed by the gathered crowd, pacing nervously at the far end of the paddock. When Elijah took his usual position, the stallion didn't approach as he had begun to do in recent days. One of Thompson's senior cowboys, a man named Vince who took particular pleasure in tormenting Elijah, stepped forward from the group. "Enough of this circus," Vince announced loudly. "I'm going to show everyone how you really handle a problem horse." Before anyone could intervene, he ducked between the fence rails, a coiled rope in his hand. Thunder's reaction was immediate and violent. The stallion's eyes went wide, his entire body transforming into a defensive weapon as he charged toward the intruder. Vince, suddenly realizing his mistake, scrambled back toward the fence as Thunder closed the distance with terrifying speed. "Jump!" someone shouted, and Vince barely cleared the top rail before Thunder crashed against the fence, wood splintering under the impact. The crowd scattered backward, gasps and cries filling the air as the stallion reared, striking out with his front hooves in a display of raw power and fear. In the chaos, only Elijah remained still. When Thunder's hooves returned to earth, nostrils flared and sides heaving with adrenaline, Elijah began to speak, not shout, just speak, in the same calm cadence he had used during their previous sessions. "It's all right," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you. You're safe. I promise you're safe." The words themselves mattered less than their delivery, a steady, gentle flow that gradually penetrated Thunder's panic. The stallion's breathing slowed, his posture incrementally relaxing as Elijah continued his quiet reassurance. The scattered onlookers watched in astonishment as Thunder gradually calmed, eventually lowering his head and backing away from the damaged section of fence. Vince, still pale and shaken, adjusted his crumpled hat. "You're all wasting your time," he stated, trying to reclaim his dignity. "But I'll give the boy this much. Never seen that devil calm down so fast after getting riled. It's almost like he understands what you're saying, kid." While Rose discreetly pulled her phone from her pocket, determined to document something that could change everything she had learned about training horses. "You're all wasting your time," Vince stated, trying to reclaim his dignity. "But I'll give the boy this much. Never seen that devil calm down so fast after getting riled. It's almost like he understands what you're saying, kid." Rose Thompson discreetly pulled her phone from her pocket, framing the scene with practiced precision. The evening light caught Elijah's profile as he remained seated, unperturbed by the commotion Vince had caused. Behind him, Thunder stood with ears forward, a stark contrast to the panicked state he'd been in moments earlier. Rose pressed record, sensing she was witnessing something her professors at veterinary school would dismiss as anecdotal sentiment rather than science. The following afternoon, Elijah arrived at the stables earlier than usual, an old guitar case slung across his back. He'd spent his lunch break restringing the instrument, fingers moving with the muscle memory inherited from countless Sunday afternoons watching his father play. The familiar ritual had calmed his own nerves, still unsettled from Vince's dangerous stunt the previous evening. "If the ground speaks to their hooves, then music speaks to their hearts," his father had once told him. "Horses feel rhythm like they feel the earth beneath them. It's a language older than words." The memory was so vivid that Elijah could almost smell his father's aftershave mixing with the scent of lemon oil he used on the guitar. Thunder was waiting at the fence when Elijah approached, head held high but ears pricked forward in what the young man had come to recognize as cautious interest rather than aggression. The stallion's posture still carried the wariness of a creature accustomed to betrayal. But there was something new in his stance: expectation. "Evening," Elijah said softly as he settled into his spot, far enough away to respect Thunder's space, but close enough for his voice to carry. "Brought something different today." He opened the case and lifted out his father's guitar, its sunburst finish catching the golden late-afternoon light. Thunder's nostrils flared at the unfamiliar object, muscles tensing momentarily before curiosity overcame caution. Elijah began to play, fingers finding a simple blues progression in E minor. The notes hung in the air between them, each one a thread in an invisible connection forming note by note, day by day. A memory surfaced, his mother's voice warm and assured. "Words are seeds, son. Plant them with wisdom, for you will harvest what you sow." Today he was planting music instead of words, letting the melodies reach places language couldn't touch. From her hidden vantage point behind an equipment shed, Rose watched intently, her camera capturing what conventional equine behavior studies would struggle to quantify: the gradual softening of Thunder's eye, the subtle relaxation of his powerful neck, the way his breathing synchronized with the rhythm of Elijah's playing. In her scientific training, horses were often reduced to behavioral patterns and physiological responses. What she was witnessing challenged that clinical detachment. There was communication happening here, not the forced compliance of traditional training, but a dialogue between equals. On the third day of what had become Elijah's established routine, he brought an apple, the fruit's red skin glowing like a small sun in his palm. After his customary music and reading session, He approached the fence with measured steps. "Thought you might like this," he said, cutting the apple into quarters with his pocket knife. Unlike his previous offering, which he'd placed on the fence before retreating, this time Elijah remained, arm extended through the rails, palm flat with the apple piece resting atop it. Thunder regarded the offering with evident suspicion, head held high, nostrils flaring to catch its scent from a safe distance. Elijah remained motionless, his expression calm despite the tension radiating from his outstretched arm. "It's always your choice," he repeated, the phrase becoming something of a mantra between them. "Everything is always your choice." Minutes passed in silence. Then, with the cautious deliberation of a creature who had learned that human offerings often came with hidden costs, Thunder took a single step forward, then another. Rose watched through her viewfinder as the stallion extended his neck, lips trembling slightly as they approached Elijah's palm. The moment felt weighted with significance beyond what her camera could capture. Trust, nascent and fragile, blooming in a space where only fear had existed before. When Thunder's velvet muzzle finally made contact with Elijah's palm, delicately lifting the apple piece, Rose had to stifle an audible gasp. It wasn't just the milestone itself, but the way Elijah remained perfectly still, not pushing for more, not attempting to touch the horse or seize the moment for greater control. By the fifth visit, a subtle but significant shift had occurred. Thunder now waited at the fence when Elijah arrived, his powerful body oriented toward the approach path rather than poised for flight. Rose had begun editing and uploading short clips to a private social media account she'd named The Whisperer and the Wild One, capturing the incremental progress that most traditional trainers would dismiss as inconsequential. "You've got yourself a fan," she told Elijah after approaching him at the ranch one morning, showing him the growing follower count on her phone. "People are fascinated by what you're doing." Elijah frowned, discomfort evident in the tightening of his shoulders. "I'm not trying to put on a show, Miss Thompson. It's Rose, please. And I know you're not," she assured him. "That's what makes it authentic. You're not performing for an audience. You're genuinely connecting with Thunder." From a distance, Richard Thompson observed their interaction, eyes narrowing with disapproval. His daughter had always been headstrong, questioning methods he'd used successfully for decades. This new fascination with Walker's unconventional approach felt like personal criticism of everything he'd built. Later that day, Rose positioned her camera carefully, having arrived early to set up proper equipment rather than relying solely on her phone. As Elijah settled into his now familiar spot, she adjusted settings to capture the warm evening light that seemed to gild both man and horse in an almost mythic glow. What happened next wasn't part of Elijah's careful routine. Instead of beginning with music or reading, he simply sat in silence, his posture betraying unusual tension. After several minutes, he began to speak, not reading, but talking directly to Thunder in a voice so low that Rose had to adjust her audio settings to capture it. "Lost my parents 2 years ago today," Elijah said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Semi-truck jackknifed on the interstate. They were coming back from San Antonio. My mom had a teacher conference there." Thunder's ears pivoted forward, tracking Elijah's voice with focused attention. "Police said it was instant. That's supposed to make it better, I guess." Elijah paused, swallowing audibly. "Dad always said you had to talk to horses with your heart, not just your voice. Guess I'm trying to figure out if that works for grief too." The vulnerability in his voice created a different kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but a space filled with unspoken understanding. Thunder, who had been standing at his usual distance from the fence, took several deliberate steps forward until he reached the weathered rails. For the first time, the stallion extended his neck across the boundary between them, nostrils flaring as he sought Elijah's scent. Their eyes met in a moment of such raw communion that Rose felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. Slowly, with the same deliberate care that characterized all his interactions with Thunder, Elijah raised his hand. The stallion flinched slightly but didn't retreat. When Elijah's fingers finally made contact with Thunder's muzzle, Rose captured what would become the most viewed clip in her growing collection, the precise moment when trust overcame trauma. Word of Elijah's progress spread beyond the immediate circle of ranch hands and neighboring properties. By the end of the week, small groups of locals had begun appearing at dusk, maintaining a respectful distance as they watched the unlikely pair's daily routine. "We saw the videos," a middle-aged woman explained, when Elijah glanced questioningly at the family setting up lawn chairs 30 yards from Thunder's paddock. "We won't disturb you. We just wanted to see for ourselves." What had begun as a cruel joke, Thompson's gift of an unmanageable horse to a marginalized employee, was evolving into something that defied the established power dynamics of Sweetwater. Each evening, the gathered observers witnessed not just Elijah's gentle persistence, but Thunder's increasing agency in their developing relationship. Richard Thompson observed this growing phenomenon with mounting irritation. The following morning, he intercepted Rose as she edited footage at the kitchen table. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he demanded, gesturing toward her laptop screen where a clip showed Elijah offering a carrot directly to Thunder, who accepted it with remarkable gentleness. "Documenting an innovative training approach," Rose replied without looking up. "It could be valuable research for my studies." "Research?" Thompson scoffed. "That boy is making a mockery of proper horsemanship, and you're helping him do it." Rose finally met her father's gaze, her expression calm but resolute. "What Elijah does intuitively aligns with the latest research on equine trauma response. The methods you consider proper, domination, breaking their spirit, are increasingly viewed as outdated and unnecessarily cruel." "Cruel?" Thompson's face flushed with anger. "I've built this ranch using techniques passed down through generations. You think a few university professors know better than centuries of practical experience?" "Science isn't nonsense, Dad," Rose countered firmly. "Elijah's method is based on trust, not fear. It's the future of equine training, whether you accept it or not." The growing rift between father and daughter mirrored the divide forming in the broader community. As more people witnessed Elijah's gentle persistence and Thunder's remarkable response, conversations in Sweetwater's diners and bars increasingly centered on the unconventional approach. "My grandfather used to talk about people with the gift," commented an elderly man who had spent his life working with horses. "Folks who could speak to animals in ways the rest of us couldn't understand. Thought it was just tall tales until I saw that boy with Thunder." Meanwhile, the subtle dance of trust between Elijah and Thunder continued its delicate progression. On a particularly warm evening, with a small audience of 7 or 8 onlookers watching from their usual distance, Thunder demonstrated his growing comfort by approaching the fence immediately upon Elijah's arrival and remaining close throughout their session. "Thunder is doing most of the work," Elijah explained to the observers as he packed up his guitar later. "He's choosing to trust again. I'm just giving him the space to make that choice." The simplicity of his explanation belied the profound shift occurring in both horse and handler. For Thunder, each interaction that ended without pain or betrayal began to rewrite the trauma response embedded in his nervous system. For Elijah, the stallion's incremental steps toward trust offered healing for wounds that had nothing to do with horses and everything to do with loss. The video of Elijah singing softly while Thunder rested his head against the fence reached 10,000 views in just 2 days, attracting attention not just from local residents, but also from a famous California horse trainer named Gerald McKinney, who called Thompson, "I've heard you have something interesting happening at your ranch. I'm willing to pay a considerable amount to see this horse in person." The video of Elijah singing softly while Thunder rested his head against the fence reached 10,000 views in just 2 days, attracting attention not just from local residents, but also from a famous California horse trainer named Gerald McKinney, who called Thompson, "I've heard you have something interesting happening at your ranch. I'm willing to pay a considerable amount to see this horse in person." Rose stared at her laptop screen the following morning, watching the view counter climb on her latest upload. She'd created the social media page on impulse after witnessing Thunder's first calm interaction with Elijah, never expecting it would spread beyond a small circle of friends and fellow veterinary students. Now, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee growing cold, she watched comments pour in from across Texas and beyond. "Who is this young man? His approach is revolutionary. I've worked with traumatized horses for 20 years and never seen progress this rapid. Is he offering training workshops? I'd drive from Oklahoma to learn his methods. She scrolled through dozens of similar messages, a mixture of excitement and trepidation building in her chest. What had begun as a simple documentation project was transforming into something with potential consequences she hadn't fully considered. Rose's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Office, now. When she entered the ranch office, Thompson was standing behind his desk, face flushed with barely contained anger. He gestured toward his computer screen displaying The Whisperer and the Wild One page. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Rose squared her shoulders. "I'm documenting an innovative approach to equine rehabilitation. Without my permission, on my property, making my ranch look like we've been doing everything wrong for 3 generations. Thompson's voice rose with each accusation. "Dad, that's not 10,000 views?" He jabbed a finger at the screen. "You've turned my business into some kind of circus attraction." "People are interested because what Elijah's doing is remarkable," Rose countered. "He's connecting with a horse everyone else gave up on." Thompson paced behind his desk. "Gerald McKinney called me this morning. You know who he is?" "Of course I do. His training methods are legendary, if somewhat traditional." "Traditional?" Thompson spat the word like an insult. "You mean effective, proven, reliable. Everything this experiment with Walker isn't." Rose recognized the dangerous glint in her father's eye, the same expression he wore when calculating profit margins or negotiating land deals. What did McKinney want? "He's offering serious money for Thunder. Said the videos caught his attention." Thompson smiled thinly. "Ironic, isn't it? Your little project might end up proving me right after all." That afternoon, Rose found Elijah by the equipment shed, repairing a broken bridle with the same careful attention he gave to Thunder. "I need to tell you something," she began, explaining about the viral videos and McKinney's call. Elijah's expression remained neutral, but his hand stilled on the leather. "I told you I didn't want attention." "I know, and I'm sorry. I thought the page would just be for documentation, for research." Rose hesitated. "But people are connecting with what you're doing. They see something different, something important." "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "McKinney wants to see Thunder, and I think my father is considering selling, despite your agreement." Elijah returned to his work, fingers moving deliberately over the worn leather. "Thunder's not ready for another change. He's just starting to trust again." The word hung between them. Trust. Such a simple concept, yet so easily broken. Later that evening, Rose arrived at Thunder's paddock early, setting up her camera equipment with more care than usual. She'd upgraded from her phone to professional gear borrowed from a university friend, determined to capture the increasingly subtle interactions between man and horse with proper fidelity. "My professor is going to go crazy when he sees this," she murmured, adjusting her tripod. Elijah approached, his expression guarded. "I'm not comfortable with all this," he gestured toward the equipment. "Drawing attention, it always brings trouble for people like me." The unspoken reality of his position, a young black man in rural Texas, already navigating daily microaggressions and outright hostility, hung in the air between them. "I understand," Rose said, though they both knew she couldn't, not really. "But what if this attention could protect Thunder, change how people think about training methods, maybe even change your situation here?" Before Elijah could respond, they noticed Thunder at the fence line, watching them with unusual alertness. Unlike previous days when he'd wait for Elijah's approach, today the stallion seemed impatient, ears pricked forward, body angled toward them. "He's expecting you now," Rose observed. "That's significant progress in trauma recovery, anticipation of positive interaction rather than fear." Elijah nodded, moving toward his usual spot with guitar in hand. As he settled on the ground, Thunder remained at the fence, his dark eyes following every movement. Instead of beginning with music as usual, Elijah sat in uncharacteristic silence. When he finally spoke, His voice carried a weight Rose hadn't heard before. "I've never told anyone this," he said softly, addressing Thunder directly. "About the night my parents died." Rose adjusted her camera, holding her breath as Elijah began to share the story of the accident, his voice occasionally breaking with emotion. He described waiting at home for parents who would never return, the sheriff's midnight visit, the sudden hollowness that had swallowed his world. "Everyone said it gets easier," he continued. "But that's not exactly right. It doesn't get smaller. You just build more life around it, like a tree growing around an embedded fence post." Thunder remained perfectly still throughout Elijah's story, his attention unwavering. When Elijah's voice finally faltered into silence, the stallion did something remarkable. He took 2 deliberate steps closer to the fence and extended his neck, nostrils flaring gently. Rose captured the moment Thunder's muzzle made contact with Elijah's outstretched fingers. A brief, gentle touch that spoke volumes about the progress they'd made. The stallion who once charged anyone approaching his paddock now sought physical connection, recognizing in Elijah a kindred wounded spirit. That evening, Rose edited the footage with trembling hands, cutting together what she knew would be her most powerful upload yet. The raw emotion in Elijah's voice contrasted with Thunder's calm attentiveness, created a narrative more compelling than any training demonstration. She hesitated only briefly before publishing it to The Whisperer and the Wild One page. By morning, the video had exploded across social media platforms. Comments poured in by the hundreds, many from people sharing their own stories of grief and healing, connecting deeply with the unspoken communication between the traumatized horse and the grieving young man. "You've just tripled your followers overnight," Rose told Elijah when she found him at the stables the next day. "And there's something else. Several local families have asked if they could watch your session with Thunder today, in person." Elijah frowned. "I'm not running a show here." "They know that. They promised to stay back and not interfere. I think they're looking for something genuine." Rose hesitated. The world has so little of that these days. That afternoon, a small group of visitors arrived at Sanford Ranch, a family with 2 teenage daughters, an elderly couple, and a middle-aged man who identified himself as a retired horse trainer. They set up folding chairs at a respectful distance from Thunder's paddock, their faces bearing expressions of hopeful anticipation. "We saw your videos," the mother explained quietly to Elijah. "We won't disturb you. We just wanted to see for ourselves." Elijah nodded uncomfortably before turning his attention to Thunder, who was watching the gathered strangers with visible tension. This was a new challenge, maintaining their fragile connection despite an audience. "Today might be different," Elijah said softly to the stallion, "but nothing between us has changed." He began with music, choosing the bluesy melodies that had first seemed to reach Thunder. Gradually, the stallion's posture relaxed, though he remained more vigilant than in recent days. From her position behind the camera, Rose watched not just the interaction between Elijah and Thunder, but also the faces of the observers. Their initial curiosity transformed into something deeper as they witnessed the patient, respectful communication unfolding before them. When Elijah eventually offered Thunder an apple slice directly from his palm, the stallion's acceptance drew quiet gasps from the audience. After the session, the retired trainer approached Elijah with evident emotion. "My grandfather used to talk about people who had the gift," he said, voice rough with feeling. "I thought it was just stories until today." The small gathering became a pattern over the following days, with different community members appearing each evening to witness what was increasingly being called the miracle at Sanford Ranch. Rose continued documenting everything, her videos now supplemented with scientific observations about Thunder's behavioral changes. "What you're doing intuitively aligns with cutting-edge research on equine trauma," she explained to the growing audience as Elijah packed up one evening. "Traditional methods force compliance through dominance. Elijah's approach respects the horse's autonomy and intelligence." By the end of the week, the evening gatherings had grown to include a local reporter and a professor from a nearby agricultural college. The atmosphere had shifted from curiosity to something approaching reverence, as though the daily sessions had become a kind of secular ritual, a space where healing happened before their eyes. Elijah remained focused solely on Thunder, maintaining their established routine despite the growing audience. The stallion continued to make progress, now greeting Elijah with soft nickering sounds and following him along the fence line as he moved. Thunder is doing most of the work, Elijah explained when visitors asked about his techniques. He's choosing to trust again. I'm just giving him the space to make that choice. For Thompson, the growing public interest represented an unexpected complication. His initial plan to humiliate Elijah had backfired spectacularly, transforming the quiet, stable hand into a local celebrity. Worse, his daughter had aligned herself firmly with the young man's methods, challenging generations of Thompson family tradition. The tension came to a head when Thompson discovered two of his youngest cowboys secretly watching Rose's videos in the tack room. "This is what you're spending work hours on," he demanded, causing the men to jump guiltily. "Watching some feel-good horse whispering nonsense?" "Sorry, boss," one mumbled. "Just curious about all the talk in town." Thompson's scowl deepened when he recognized several prominent Sweetwater residents in the background of the video, people whose opinion actually mattered to his standing in the community. That evening, he called Gerald McKinney again, his decision crystallizing with each ring of the phone. If Walker's little circus was attracting this much attention, perhaps there was profit to be made after all. Profit that would simultaneously solve his growing problem. The video of Elijah singing softly while Thunder rested his head against the fence reached 10,000 views in just 2 days, attracting attention not just from local residents, but also from a famous California horse trainer named Gerald McKinney, who called Thompson, "I've heard you have something interesting happening at your ranch. I'm willing to pay a considerable amount to see this horse in person." The video of Elijah singing softly while Thunder rested his head against the fence reached 10,000 views in just 2 days, attracting attention not just from local residents but also from a famous California horse trainer named Gerald McKinney, who called Thompson, "I've heard you have something interesting happening at your ranch. I'm willing to pay a considerable amount to see this horse in person." A light rain began to fall over Sweetwater as dawn broke 2 weeks after Elijah's first encounter with Thunder. The gentle patter on the roof of his small quarters provided a rhythm that matched his resolve. Today would be different. Today, after 14 days of patience and incremental progress, Elijah had decided it was time to enter Thunder's paddock. Word spread quickly through the morning conversations at the feed store and diner. By mid-afternoon, a text message chain initiated by Rose had alerted a small but dedicated group of followers that something significant might happen at the evening session. The rain continued intermittently throughout the day, occasionally strengthening into brief downpours before settling back into a misty drizzle that turned the Texas dust into rich, earthy-smelling mud. "You sure about this?" Rose asked, setting up her camera under a portable canopy she'd brought to protect her equipment. The rain might make him more unpredictable. Elijah watched distant lightning flash on the horizon. "We've built something these past 2 weeks. I need to trust that as much as he needs to trust me." A reporter from the local newspaper approached, notebook already dampened by the persistent drizzle. "Ms. Thompson, what can we expect today? Are there risks involved?" Rose considered her words carefully. There are always risks when working with traumatized animals, but Elijah's approach minimizes those by respecting Thunder's agency. The small crowd had grown to nearly 20 people, huddled under umbrellas and raincoats at their usual respectful distance. Richard Thompson arrived unexpectedly, accompanied by his personal veterinarian, Dr. Harrison. "I'll be observing every move," Thompson announced, eyeing Elijah critically. "Any tricks and our deal is canceled." "No tricks," Elijah replied simply. "Just continuation of what we've been building." Thunder stood at the far end of the paddock, his black and white coat glistening with rain, eyes tracking the unusual number of visitors with evident wariness. Unlike previous evenings when he'd greet Elijah at the fence, today he maintained his distance, body language communicating uncertainty about the changed circumstances. Elijah approached the gate slowly, each step deliberate in the slick mud. The gathering fell silent, Collective breath held as his hand reached for the latch. The metallic click seemed unnaturally loud in the rain-softened quiet. The gate swung open with a creak that caused Thunder's ears to flick forward sharply. Elijah paused in the threshold, allowing the stallion to process this significant change in their established routine. "He's going in," someone whispered unnecessarily, the tension in their voice reflecting the collective anxiety. Thunder's reaction was immediate. He backed several steps, head high, nostrils flared to catch Elijah's scent through the rain-washed air, his muscles tensed visibly beneath the sleek coat, ready for flight or fight. Rather than approaching the nervous animal, Elijah simply entered the paddock and closed the gate behind him. Then, in a move that drew confused murmurs from the observers, he sat down cross-legged in the wet grass exactly as he'd done outside the fence for 2 weeks. "What's he doing?" Dr. Harrison muttered to Thompson. "He'll get nowhere just sitting there." Thompson didn't respond. His eyes narrowed against the rain as he watched the scene unfold. Elijah extracted his mother's book of Psalms from inside his jacket where he'd kept it protected from the rain. Opening to a familiar page, he began to read aloud, his voice carrying the same gentle cadence that had become a constant in Thunder's days. "This is revolutionary," Rose whispered into her camera as she recorded. "He's demonstrating that crossing the physical boundary doesn't change his fundamental approach. He's showing Thunder that he represents no threat, regardless of proximity." For 30 minutes, the tableau remained unchanged. Elijah reading quietly in the rain, Thunder maintaining his vigilant distance, the audience watching in silence, punctuated only by the sound of falling rain and Elijah's steady voice. Then, in a moment that caused Rose to hold her breath behind her viewfinder, Thunder took a tentative step forward, then another. His approach was indirect, circling gradually closer rather than moving straight toward Elijah. Elijah continued reading, giving no indication that he noticed the stallion's cautious advance. Only when Thunder was close enough that his breath could be felt did Elijah acknowledge him, slowly closing his book and remaining perfectly still. Thunder stretched his neck forward, nostrils flared as he investigated Elijah's scent more intimately than the fence had previously allowed. His breath huffed warm against Elijah's rain-dampened hair. The crowd watched in stunned silence as minutes passed in this delicate examination. Then, in a moment that would become the most viewed clip in Rose's growing collection, Thunder did something extraordinary. He lowered himself to the wet grass near Elijah, close enough that the young man could have reached out to touch him, yet maintaining a small buffer of safety. The stallion wasn't fully relaxed. His ears still swiveled attentively, monitoring every subtle sound. But the fact that he would lie down in the presence of a human within his territory represented a breakthrough that even the most skeptical observers couldn't deny. "My God," breathed the elderly trainer who had become a regular attendee. "In 40 years with horses, I've never—" Even Thompson's expression had shifted from skepticism to something less certain, though his voice remained harsh when he muttered to his veterinarian, "Check him for sedatives when this is done. This isn't natural." The rain continued falling, soaking both man and horse, yet neither seemed to notice as they shared this moment of quiet communion. Elijah made no attempt to touch Thunder or push for more contact, honoring the boundary the horse had established even in this new closeness. Rose captured the perfect moment, the rain creating a silvery curtain around them, Elijah reading peacefully, the powerful stallion lying near him like a faithful companion. After nearly an hour, Elijah slowly closed his book and, with movements as deliberate as his entrance, rose to his feet. Thunder stood as well but made no move to retreat. Elijah walked calmly to the gate and let himself out, closing it quietly behind him. Only when he rejoined the gathered observers did the spell seem to break, questions and exclamations flowing from all sides. "How did you know he wouldn't attack? Was this planned or spontaneous? Will you try touching him next time?" Thompson pushed through the small crowd, Dr. Harrison at his heels. "I want that horse tested now," he demanded, voice tight with angry disbelief. "No animal changes behavior that drastically without chemical help." "That's unnecessary," Rose intervened, stepping between her father and the veterinarian. "It's fine," Elijah said quietly. "Let him test. Thunder has nothing to hide, and neither do I." The following morning, Dr. Harrison's test results confirmed what Elijah and Rose already knew. Thunder showed no traces of sedatives or behavior-modifying drugs. The stallion's transformation was exactly what it appeared to be, a genuine response to Elijah's patient, respectful approach. The news spread through Sweetwater like wildfire, polarizing the community in ways that revealed deeper divides than just horse training philosophy. At the Rusty Spur, the local bar, heated discussions broke out nightly between traditionalists who defended Thompson's generations-old methods and those who saw promise in Elijah's gentle persistence. "You can't coddle an animal that size," insisted Vince, nursing his third beer. "They need a firm hand to know who's boss." "Maybe that's why you've been thrown more times than a pair of dice," countered Sandra, a young barrel racer who had started attending Elijah's sessions. "Maybe horses need partnership, not dictatorship." The divide often fell along predictable lines, older ranchers and cowboys defending traditional dominance-based training, while younger people and women were more receptive to approaches based on mutual trust and respect. On his 7th visit inside the paddock, Elijah brought a worn saddle blanket, its edges frayed from years of use. The evening was clear, the earlier rains having left behind a freshness that made colors seem more vivid, scents more pronounced. "This belonged to my father," Elijah explained quietly to Thunder, who now greeted him with soft nickering sounds when he entered the enclosure. "It still smells like him, I think." He held the blanket out for Thunder to investigate, allowing the stallion to thoroughly sniff and examine it before making any move to place it on his back. The crowd, which had now grown to include regular attendees who knew to remain silent during these interactions, watched with bated breath. "He's going to try putting it on," someone whispered, the excitement palpable. Thunder's initial reaction to the blanket approaching his back was tense. His skin twitched, ears flattened momentarily, but Elijah moved with such slow deliberation that the stallion had time to process each incremental step. "It's okay," Elijah murmured. "Nothing will hurt you again, I promise." When the blanket finally settled on Thunder's back, the stallion stood trembling slightly but made no move to buck or flee. It was the first time anything resembling riding equipment had touched him since his traumatic experience. Rose zoomed in on Thunder's eye, capturing the moment of decision, the instant when trust overcame instinctive fear. The soft brown eye, once wild with terror, now held uncertainty, but not panic. Thompson watched from his truck parked at the perimeter, jaw tight with conflicted emotions. The evidence before him challenged everything he'd built his reputation upon, the necessity of breaking a horse's spirit to achieve obedience. Yet here was a stallion voluntarily accepting human direction without a single harsh word or physical correction. The video of Elijah sitting peacefully in the rain with Thunder lying nearby reached 500,000 views within days of Rose posting it. Comments poured in from across the country and beyond, many from professional trainers questioning their own methods in light of what they were witnessing. Gerald McKinney, the renowned California trainer who had contacted Thompson, called again after watching the latest footage. "I need to see this in person," he insisted. "What that young man is doing could change how we approach trauma cases entirely." When the video of Elijah sitting peacefully in the rain with Thunder lying nearby hit 500,000 views, Gerald McKinney, the famous California trainer, called Thompson again. "I just saw what's happening with that Appaloosa. I'm prepared to offer $100,000 for the animal, and I need him immediately." Leaving Thompson with a calculating smile as he looked out his window toward the paddock where Elijah now spent all his free afternoons. When the video of Elijah sitting peacefully in the rain with Thunder lying nearby hit 500,000 views, Gerald McKinney, the famous California trainer, called Thompson again. "I just saw what's happening with that Appaloosa. I'm prepared to offer $100,000 for the animal, and I need him immediately." Leaving Thompson with a calculating smile as he looked out his window toward the paddock where Elijah now spent all his free afternoons. The following morning, Thompson straightened his bolo tie, and smoothed his silver-streaked hair before summoning Elijah to the main office. Through the window, he watched the young man approach, his gait steady but cautious. The boy always moved like that, Thompson thought, like someone expecting the ground to shift beneath his feet at any moment. "Come in," Thompson called before Elijah could knock. The ranch owner settled behind his mahogany desk, arranging his features into what he considered a business-like expression. Elijah entered, his eyes taking in the mounted trophy heads on the walls, silent witnesses to Thompson's conception of mastery over nature. He stood straight-backed before the desk, hands at his sides, face carefully neutral. "Impressive what you've done with that animal," Thompson began, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But unfortunately, our agreement needs to end." "What do you mean?" Elijah asked, his stomach tightening with premonition. Thompson slid a document across the polished desktop. "I checked with my lawyer. Since Thunder technically still belongs to Sanford Ranch until the end of the month, and since you're my employee, any work you perform with him belongs to me." Elijah stared at the paper, an official order prohibiting him from any further contact with Thunder. The legal language swam before his eyes, cold and impersonal, reducing his connection with the stallion to a property dispute. "I've received an excellent offer from Gerald McKinney, that famous trainer from California," Thompson continued, leaning back in his chair. "He saw the video and is willing to pay a small fortune for the horse. Obviously, we need to deliver him in good condition, so you should stay away now. We don't want the animal getting too attached to you." Elijah's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the document. Thunder isn't ready for another transition. He's just beginning to trust again. "Trust," Thompson scoffed. "He's a horse boy, not a person, and a valuable one at that. McKinney is offering $100,000. He leaned forward, emphasizing each word. "You think I should turn that down so a ranch hand can keep playing horse whisperer?" The news spread through Sweetwater with the speed that only small-town networks could achieve. By lunchtime, the counter at Mabel's Diner buzzed with the story. Thunder was being sold to a California trainer, and Elijah had been ordered to cease all contact. Rose slammed her bedroom door that evening, the sound reverberating through the Thompson ranch house. She found her father in the dining room, calmly cutting into a rare steak as if nothing had happened. "How could you?" she demanded, hands planted on the table. "After everything Elijah's accomplished with Thunder." Thompson chewed deliberately before answering. "It's business, Rose. McKinney made an offer I'd be a fool to refuse. You don't care about the horse or Elijah. You're just angry because someone proved your outdated training methods aren't the only way." "Don't lecture me about training horses," Thompson replied coldly, setting down his knife and fork. "I've been in this business since before you were born. Besides, it's a matter of business. McKinney is offering $100,000. You think I should refuse that so an employee can continue playing horse whisperer? It's not playing. What he's doing is based on actual research, on understanding equine psychology instead of just forcing submission." Rose's voice cracked with frustration. "You've seen the videos. You've seen how Thunder responds to him. What I've seen is a novelty act that's gone viral. That doesn't make it legitimate training." Thompson took a sip of water. "The deal is done, Rose. McKinney will be here next week." While the Thompson household fractured along new fault lines, Elijah faced his own agonizing dilemma. Legally, Thompson was right. He had no claim to Thunder. Furthermore, directly challenging the most powerful man in Sweetwater would mean losing not just his job, but potentially any future working with horses in the region. Yet he knew with bone-deep certainty that separating Thunder now would devastate the animal. The stallion's newly built trust would shatter, sending him spiraling back into trauma or worse if McKinney attempted to use conventional methods. The First Methodist Church of Sweetwater sat on a quiet corner 2 blocks from the town square, its modest white steeple rising above pecan trees that had witnessed generations of the community's triumphs and struggles. Pastor Michael Wilson had known Elijah since he was a boy, had comforted him after his parents' funeral, and had watched with quiet pride as the young man maintained his faith through grief that might have broken others. "This situation troubles me deeply," Pastor Wilson said to the small gathering that had assembled in the church basement on Wednesday evening. Elijah has shown us something remarkable. Not just about horses, but about patience, kindness, and the healing power of gentle persistence. Among those present were several families who had witnessed Elijah's sessions with thunder, along with a handful of small ranch owners, and even Sandra, the young barrel racer from the Rusty Spur discussions. "We can't just stand by," said Helen Martinez, whose family owned a small property on the outskirts of town. "If Thompson fires you, Elijah, we have a spare room and could use help with our horses." Others nodded in agreement, various offers of support emerging from the group: jobs, housing, legal consultation. The pastor outlined plans for a community fund to help if financial hardship resulted from standing up to Thompson. Elijah sat quietly, overwhelmed by the support but acutely aware of the complexities involved. "I appreciate everything," he finally said. "But this isn't just about my job, it's about what's best for Thunder." As the meeting dispersed, Rose waited outside, having slipped away from the ranch after dinner. "I've started an online petition," she told Elijah, showing him her phone screen. 3,000 signatures already. "Save Thunder and Elijah. Don't separate kindred spirits." Elijah frowned at the dramatic headline. "I don't need saving, Rose." "Maybe not," she conceded. "But Thunder does, and the principal does. This isn't just about one horse or one trainer anymore. It's about challenging a system that values dominance over partnership." The following day, David Sanford arrived at Thunder's paddock unannounced. The older rancher stood silently observing as the stallion trotted along the fence line, occasionally nickering toward the road as if expecting someone. "He's looking for you," Sanford remarked when Elijah approached hesitantly from a distance, honoring Thompson's order not to interact with Thunder directly. "Remarkable change from the animal that nearly killed my best handler." They watched together as Thunder paced, his movements increasingly agitated as he sensed Elijah's presence, but couldn't reach him. "Never thought I'd see this horse happy again," Sanford continued, his weathered face thoughtful. "Perhaps we should reconsider the sale." "Would you?" Elijah asked, hope flaring briefly. Sanford sighed. "It's complicated. Thompson's already closed the deal with McKinney. Legal documents are being prepared." Thunder's distress became more evident with each passing day of Elijah's absence. Rose filmed secretly from a distance, capturing footage of the stallion refusing food, running nervously along the fence line, and whinnying toward the road where Elijah always approached from. The video she posted, titled "Separation Anxiety, Thunder's Heartbreak," garnered immediate sympathy online, further inflaming the controversy in Sweetwater and beyond. Comments poured in questioning the ethics of separating a traumatized animal from the only person who had successfully reached him. Elijah struggled with his conscience through sleepless nights, the image of Thunder's searching gaze haunting him. On Sunday after church, several small property owners approached him again with concrete offers. "We have 15 acres with a good barn," said Robert Chen, whose family ran a modest breeding operation for quarter horses. "Room for you and Thunder both, if it comes to that." The conversation with Rose that evening crystallized his dilemma. They met at the old fishing dock by Miller's Pond, neutral territory away from both ranches, the setting sun turning the water to molten copper. "It's not just about Thunder or the money," Elijah said, breaking a long silence. "It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you." Rose nodded, understanding the deeper currents beneath his words. "My father has always seen the world in terms of ownership and control. Animals, land, people, all resources to be managed and exploited. And challenging that view has consequences," Elijah finished quietly. "Yes," she agreed, "but so does accepting it." Meanwhile, Thompson received confirmation that the transport truck would arrive the following week. He gathered his senior cowboys in the main barn, issuing instructions with the precision of a military commander. "I want that horse ready for travel by noon Thursday," he ordered. "Use tranquilizers if necessary. I don't care how, but I want that animal inside the trailer when McKinney arrives with his check." What Thompson didn't realize was that Rose had positioned herself in the adjacent tack room, recording his instructions on her phone. Within minutes, the audio was uploaded to her now 50,000 follower account, accompanied by a passionate plea for intervention before Thunder was forcibly removed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Calls and emails flooded the Thompson Ranch office, the Sweetwater Town Hall, and even the local sheriff's department. Animal welfare organizations from San Antonio and Dallas announced they would send representatives to monitor the situation. As pressure mounted, Elijah maintained his distance physically while suffering the emotional torment of knowing Thunder was searching for him. Each time he drove past Sanford Ranch, he could see the stallion at the fence line, head raised, scanning the road. The psychological toll on Thunder became increasingly evident. The stallion, who had begun to play and explore his paddock, now spent hours standing motionless, his posture reflecting the shutdown response common in traumatized animals. When ranch hands approached with feed, he retreated to the farthest corner, refusing to eat while anyone was present. "It's like he's gone back to the beginning," Rose told Elijah during another clandestine meeting. "All the progress, all the trust, it's unraveling day by day." The night before the scheduled transport, Elijah sat alone on the small porch of his quarters, his father's guitar across his lap. The melody he played was mournful, notes rising into the star-filled Texas sky like unanswered questions. His phone buzzed with a message from Rose. "The deadline is set," Thompson had announced to his cowboys. "The transport truck arrives tomorrow at noon, and I want that horse ready to travel. Use tranquilizers if necessary, but I don't care how. I want that animal inside the trailer when McKinney arrives with his check." Without realizing that Rose was recording his words from the adjacent hallway, her finger already pressing send to share the audio with her now 50,000 followers. "The deadline is set," Thompson had announced to his cowboys. "The transport truck arrives tomorrow at noon, and I want that horse ready to travel. Use tranquilizers if necessary, but I don't care how. I want that animal inside the trailer when McKinney arrives with his check." Without realizing that Rose was recording his words from the adjacent hallway, her finger already pressing send to share the audio with her now 50,000 followers. Dawn broke over Sweetwater in streaks of angry crimson, the sky itself seeming to mirror the tension that had built overnight. Thompson stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as his men prepared for what should have been a routine transport operation. The audio recording Rose had shared had ignited a firestorm online, but Thompson remained unmoved. In his world, business transactions weren't subject to public opinion. "We've got company," called Vince, pointing toward the main road where several vehicles were approaching the ranch entrance. Thompson squinted against the rising sun, recognizing David Sanford's truck leading what appeared to be a small convoy. "What the hell is this?" Thompson muttered, setting down his coffee and striding toward the driveway. Sanford stepped out first, followed by two women Thompson recognized as representatives from a regional animal welfare organization. Behind them, several Sweetwater residents emerged: the Methodist pastor, the Chen family, and others who had been attending Elijah's sessions with Thunder. "Richard," Sanford began, his tone conciliatory but firm, "we need to talk about today's transport." Thompson's face hardened. "There's nothing to discuss. The sale is final." One of the animal welfare representatives stepped forward, extending a business card. "Sir, we've received numerous concerns about the potential trauma to this animal. We're here to observe the transport and ensure humane treatment." "This is private property," Thompson began, but Sanford interrupted. "Technically, Thunder is still on my property until the transport is complete, and I've invited these people as witnesses." Meanwhile, at the Sanford Ranch, 4 of Thompson's most experienced cowboys approached Thunder's paddock, rope halters and lead lines in hand. The stallion stood at the far end, ears pinned back, nostrils flared as he sensed their intent. "Remember what Thompson said. Trank him if necessary," Vince instructed, loading a syringe with sedative. "But let's try to do this clean first. McKinney wants to see what he's buying." They entered the paddock in formation, spreading out to corner Thunder against the back fence. The stallion's muscles bunched visibly beneath his gleaming coat, eyes rolling to show whites, the unmistakable sign of equine panic. "Easy, boy," one cowboy called, his tone falsely soothing as he inched forward with an extended halter. "Just going for a little ride today." Thunder's response was explosive. With a high-pitched squeal that seemed to contain all the terror of his original trauma, he charged directly at the approaching men. They scattered, barely avoiding his flashing hooves as he thundered past, making for the gate they'd left partially open. "Close it!" Vince shouted, but too late. Thunder burst through the opening, powerful shoulders splintering the wood as he galloped into the open fields beyond the paddock. The commotion drew immediate attention from the group at the Thompson Ranch entrance. Rose, who had positioned herself strategically to document the morning's events, captured the moment on video. Thunder running free across the meadow, mane flying, while cowboys scrambled ineffectually to give chase. "That's what happens when you push too hard," Sanford commented, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "That animal remembers what humans did to him." For 3 chaotic hours, the cowboys attempted to recapture Thunder. They brought out saddle horses, formed search parties, and even tried to herd him with Thompson's truck. But the stallion had been a champion for good reason. His speed and intelligence easily outmatched their efforts. Whenever they thought they had him cornered, he would find an opening and disappear again into the rolling Texas landscape. By mid-morning, Thompson's patience had evaporated completely. The transport truck had arrived, its driver waiting impatiently as the chaos unfolded. McKinney had called twice, confirming he was en route with the paperwork and payment. "Enough of this nonsense," Thompson finally declared, returning to his truck and reaching behind the seat. When he straightened, he was holding his hunting rifle. "If we can't catch him, nobody gets him." A collective gasp rose from the gathered observers. "Richard, you can't be serious," Sanford protested, stepping toward his neighbor. "It's business," Thompson replied coldly, checking the rifle's chamber. "That horse is destroying valuable property, endangering my men, and preventing a legal sale. I have every right." Rose's hands trembled as she continued filming, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never seen her father like this. Cold calculation replaced by something darker, more primitive. His pride had been wounded publicly, his authority challenged, and now his response revealed something broken in the man she'd always struggled to understand. It was at this precise moment that Elijah arrived, alerted by Rose's frantic text message about the unfolding disaster. He parked his battered pickup at the edge of the property and ran toward the assembled group, immediately assessing the situation. Thunder visible in the distance, still evading capture. Thompson with rifle in hand, the transport driver checking his watch impatiently. "Stop, boy! You'll get yourself killed!" Thompson shouted as Elijah ran past him, heading directly into the open field where Thunder was last spotted. Elijah ignored the warning, moving with purpose toward the middle of the meadow. Once there, he stopped and did something that struck the observers as either madness or inspiration. He began to sing. The melody rose clear and strong in the morning air, a gospel hymn his mother had sung during Texas thunderstorms when he was small, afraid of the lightning. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me." Thunder, who had been galloping in wide circles to avoid his pursuers, stopped abruptly at the familiar voice. His ears swiveled forward, locating the source of the sound that had become associated with safety and respect over their weeks together. The watching crowd fell silent, even Thompson lowering his rifle slightly as they witnessed what happened next. Thunder, still trembling with exertion and fear, turned toward Elijah's voice. For several long seconds, the stallion remained frozen, processing the unexpected presence of the one human who had never caused him pain. Then, with deliberate steps that gradually increased in confidence, Thunder began walking toward Elijah. Not charging, not fleeing, approaching with purpose. Rose zoomed her camera lens to capture the stallion's expression, the ears now pricked forward attentively, the softening around the eyes that equine behaviorists recognize as the relaxation of fear. Thunder moved with the regal dignity that had once made him a champion, each step seeming to shed the panic that had driven him moments before. The cowboys, watching from various positions around the field, remained motionless, sensing that any intervention would shatter this inexplicable connection unfolding before them. Elijah continued singing softly, making no move toward the approaching horse, allowing Thunder complete agency in their reunion. When the stallion finally reached him in the center of the field, The young man simply extended his hand, palm up, the gesture that had become their shared language of trust. Thunder lowered his muzzle to Elijah's palm, nostrils flaring gently as he drew in the familiar scent. The contact seemed to complete a circuit between them, two beings recognizing in each other something that transcended the chaos surrounding them. From her position near the transport truck, Rose captured the moment in perfect focus. Elijah standing calm and centered while Thunder pressed his forehead against the young man's chest, the stallion's powerful body now completely still, as if finding anchor after a storm. "That doesn't change anything," Thompson insisted afterward, though his voice lacked conviction. "The deal is closed." The gathered observers exchanged glances, the shared understanding that they had witnessed something that defied the conventional relationships between humans and animals, between power and submission. Even the transport driver seemed reluctant now, watching as Elijah gently led Thunder back toward the paddock without rope or halter, just the silent agreement between them that they would walk this path together. What Thompson didn't know was that Rose had contacted McKinney directly after uploading the audio of her father's orders. She had sent the trainer complete videos of Elijah's approach and explained the situation in detail. McKinney, though traditional in many of his methods, had built his reputation on understanding equine psychology. His response to Rose had been unexpected and would soon transform the conflict in ways no one anticipated. As Thunder and Elijah reached the paddock gate, the stallion hesitated, his body tensing at the memory of the morning's chaos. Elijah simply stood beside him, speaking too softly for others to hear. "I know they scared you," he murmured, "but I'll stay right here. No one will force you again." After several moments, Thunder stepped voluntarily back into the paddock, Elijah at his side. Rose continued filming as her father watched, the rifle now lowered completely, his expression unreadable. The transport driver approached Thompson, clipboard in hand. "Sir, given the circumstances, I'm not comfortable loading that animal today. The company has protocols about distressed horses." Thompson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a new vehicle pulled into the drive, a sleek black SUV with California plates. Gerald McKinney had arrived, earlier than expected due to the approaching storm that had darkened the western horizon. The famous trainer stepped out, tall and weathered from decades working outdoors, his gaze immediately finding Thunder and Elijah in the paddock. He stood silently, observing their interaction with the practiced eye of someone who had dedicated his life to understanding horses. Thunder remained close to Elijah, occasionally nudging the young man's shoulder or neck, gestures of affiliation rarely seen between traumatized horses and humans. Even from a distance, the stallion's body language communicated a profound transformation from the terrified, aggressive animal he had been just weeks earlier. "That doesn't change anything," insisted Thompson, but his voice trembled slightly when he added, "The deal is closed. The horse will be delivered today." Without knowing that Gerald McKinney, the famous California trainer, was observing the entire scene from the entrance of the ranch, having arrived earlier due to the approaching storm, his face revealing an expression that mixed professional admiration with the decision already made. "That doesn't change anything," insisted Thompson, but his voice trembled slightly when he added, "The deal is closed. The horse will be delivered today." Without knowing that Gerald McKinney, the famous California trainer, was observing the entire scene from the entrance of the ranch, having arrived earlier due to the approaching storm, his face revealing an expression that mixed professional admiration with a decision already made. McKinney approached the gathered group with unhurried confidence, his weathered boots leaving precise impressions in the Texas dust. Unlike many celebrity trainers with their embroidered shirts and silver belt buckles, he dressed simply, worn jeans, a plain button-down shirt, and a straw hat that had clearly seen many seasons. "Impressive," he said, nodding toward the paddock where Elijah still stood with Thunder. "Very impressive indeed." Thompson turned, momentarily startled by McKinney's early arrival. He quickly composed himself, extending his hand. "Gerald, welcome to Sweetwater. Didn't expect you till this afternoon." Weather reports showed this storm front moving in faster than expected, McKinney shook Thompson's hand briefly before returning his attention to the paddock. Seems I arrived at an interesting moment. Rose stepped forward, camera still recording. Mr. McKinney, I'm Rose Thompson. We've been corresponding about— I know who you are, McKinney interrupted, though not unkindly. Your videos have been quite enlightening. Thompson's expression darkened. There's been some drama this morning, but nothing that affects our arrangement. The horse will be ready for transport once we get him properly sedated. McKinney raised an eyebrow. Sedated? After what I just witnessed? That seems unnecessary. The animal is unpredictable, Thompson insisted. You saw how he reacted to my men. I saw a horse responding logically to perceived threat, McKinney replied. His calm assessment carried the weight of 4 decades working with troubled horses. And I saw something else too, something that might change our arrangement considerably. Inside the paddock, Thunder remained close to Elijah, occasionally pressing his muzzle against the young man's shoulder, a gesture of affiliation rarely seen from traumatized horses. The stallion's ears moved constantly, monitoring the cluster of humans by the driveway while maintaining physical contact with Elijah, as if the young man represented his only safe harbor in a world of potential threats. He hasn't done that with anyone else, Rose explained, noticing McKinney's interest in this behavior. Not since the accident. McKinney nodded thoughtfully. May I approach them? Not enter the paddock, just observe from closer proximity. Thompson started to object, but McKinney was already walking toward the fence, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He stopped several yards away, giving Thunder ample space to assess this new presence. Mr. Walker, McKinney called softly. I'm Gerald McKinney. Elijah nodded respectfully. I know who you are, sir. What you've accomplished with this horse is remarkable, McKinney continued, especially given the time frame. Would you mind describing your approach? Thunder tensed at the unfamiliar voice, his body angling slightly to position Elijah between himself and the perceived threat. Elijah responded by simply standing still, neither restraining the horse nor moving away, allowing Thunder to make his own choice about their positioning. I didn't do much, sir, Elijah replied. Just gave him time and space to decide if I could be trusted. Time and space, McKinney repeated thoughtfully. The two things most training programs try to minimize in favor of quick results. Thompson approached, his patience visibly thinning. Gerald, we should discuss the transport arrangements. My office would be more comfortable than standing in this heat. In a moment, Richard. McKinney kept his attention on Elijah and Thunder. Would you demonstrate how you've been working with him? Not for show, just whatever you'd normally do. Elijah hesitated, glancing at Thompson, who gave a curt nod, clearly unhappy but unwilling to contradict the famous trainer directly. With the same quiet presence that had characterized all his interactions with Thunder, Elijah began humming softly, the same gospel melody he'd used to call the stallion back from his panicked flight. Thunder's response was immediate, his ears focusing forward, his breathing slowing visibly. Elijah then walked slowly to the center of the paddock. Without command or pressure, Thunder followed, maintaining the precise distance he found comfortable, close enough for security, but with enough space to move freely if needed. McKinney watched with evident fascination as Elijah demonstrated various aspects of their communication. How Thunder would now accept gentle contact along his neck and shoulders. How he would follow Elijah's movements without restraint. How he responded to changes in vocal tone rather than physical cues. Extraordinary, McKinney murmured, more to himself than the gathered observers. The horse is making choices rather than responding to pressure. He's engaged rather than compliant. Thunder, seemingly aware he was being discussed, raised his head higher, nostrils flaring as he assessed McKinney's scent from a distance. There was wariness in his posture, but not the blind panic he'd shown earlier with Thompson's cowboys. I'd like to speak with you privately, McKinney said to Thompson after several minutes of observation. What I had in mind has evolved since arriving here. In Thompson's office, McKinney declined the offered whiskey, requesting water instead as he settled into a leather chair across from the ornate desk. Rose had positioned herself by the door, ostensibly to bring refreshments but clearly intent on witnessing whatever negotiation was about to unfold. "Your daughter's videos captured something significant," McKinney began, "but seeing it in person confirms what I suspected. That young man has a gift I've rarely encountered in 40 years of horsemanship." Thompson's jaw tightened. "Walker is a good stable hand with a soft touch. That doesn't make him a trainer." "Perhaps our definitions differ," McKinney replied mildly. "In my experience, a trainer is someone who can communicate effectively with horses regardless of credentials or background." Rose stepped forward, unable to contain herself. "Mr. McKinney, Elijah has no formal training at all. Everything he does is intuitive, based on observing the horse's needs, rather than imposing human expectations." "That's precisely what makes it valuable," McKinney said. "He hasn't been programmed to see horses through the lens of traditional methods. He sees them as they are." Thompson drummed his fingers on the desk. "We had an agreement, Gerald. $100,000 for the Appaloosa delivered today." "Yes, we did." McKinney took a deliberate sip of water. "But I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement, one that might be more profitable for all concerned." Outside, the approaching storm had darkened the sky prematurely, casting the ranch in an eerie twilight. Elijah remained with Thunder, sensing that the stallion's anxiety increased with the dropping barometric pressure. The smell of rain hung heavy in the air, and distant thunder rolled across the plains, sound that might trigger the horse's traumatic memories of the arena accident. "We'll be all right," Elijah murmured, sitting cross-legged in the center of the paddock while Thunder circled him in gradually decreasing spirals, a behavior the stallion had developed that seemed to self-soothe his nervous energy. Inside the office, McKinney outlined his new proposal, his weathered hands sketching imaginary blueprints on Thompson's desk. "Instead of buying Thunder and taking him to California, I want to invest in creating a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses right here in Sweetwater, with Walker as the head trainer." Thompson's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Walker? He's a stable hand, not a business partner. He's a natural horseman with a methodology that could revolutionize how we approach equine trauma," McKinney countered. "What I witnessed today is worth far more than a single stallion, no matter how valuable his bloodline." Rose struggled to contain her excitement as McKinney continued describing his vision, a specialized facility that would attract clients from across the country, combining Elijah's intuitive approach with scientific documentation and research. "We'd need land," McKinney concluded. "I was hoping that perhaps you might consider leasing us that undeveloped parcel at the north end of your property, with appropriate compensation, of course." Thompson leaned back, eyes narrowing calculatingly. The businessman in him recognized opportunity, even as his pride resisted acknowledging the value in methods that contradicted everything he'd built his reputation upon. "You'd invest the full $100,000?" he asked. "Plus additional capital for facilities," McKinney confirmed. "But Walker would need to be a full partner, not an employee. His approach is the centerpiece of the entire concept." The negotiations continued as the storm clouds gathered, thunder now audible through the office windows. Thompson raised objections about Elijah's age, his lack of business experience, the uncertainty of the market for such specialized services. Each concern McKinney addressed with the confidence of someone who had built a successful enterprise around understanding horses and the humans who loved them. Rose watched her father's resistance gradually erode under the combined pressure of McKinney's reputation and the undeniable financial potential of the proposal. When Thompson finally stepped to the window, gazing out toward Thunder's paddock where Elijah still sat with the stallion despite the impending storm, she knew the tide had turned. "He did save that horse," Thompson admitted reluctantly. "No other trainer made progress with him after the accident." "It's more than that," McKinney replied, joining him at the window. "He's demonstrating an approach that honors the horse's intelligence and agency. That's increasingly what today's owners are seeking, partnership rather than dominance." Outside, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, pattering against the drought-hardened ground. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a resonant boom of thunder. In the paddock, Thunder's head shot up, eyes wide with the memory of arena lights and the crash that had taken his former owner's life. Elijah remained seated, continuing the soft, steady stream of words that had become their shared sanctuary. The stallion's panic rose visibly. His breathing accelerated, muscles bunching as ancient survival instincts urged flight from the perceived danger. "I know it's frightening," Elijah said calmly, "but you're safe here. We're safe together." From the office window, Thompson, McKinney, and Rose watched as Thunder fought his internal battle: trust versus trauma, present reality versus embedded memory. The stallion circled Elijah with increasing speed, torn between the urge to flee and the security the young man represented. When lightning struck a tree at the edge of the property with a deafening crack, Thunder reared in terror, hooves slashing the air dangerously close to where Elijah sat. Instead of scrambling away, the young man remained still, his voice never changing in tone or rhythm. "You decide," they heard him say to the frightened animal. "It's always your choice." For a breathless moment, it seemed Thunder might bolt or strike out in blind panic. Then, in a decision that seemed to require immense internal struggle, the stallion lowered himself to the ground beside Elijah, pressing close as rain began falling in earnest. "Tomorrow we'll decide who is right about how to treat these animals," declared Thompson as he adjusted his expensive hat before the mirror, unaware that fate was preparing a much more dramatic turn than any planned demonstration could offer, while the dark clouds continued gathering on Sweetwater's horizon. "Tomorrow we'll decide who is right about how to treat these animals," declared Thompson as he adjusted his expensive hat before the mirror, unaware that fate was preparing a much more dramatic turn than any planned demonstration could offer, while the dark clouds continued gathering on Sweetwater's horizon. The morning of the Sweetwater Annual Rodeo dawned with unexpected clarity after the previous day's storms. The rain had scrubbed the Texas sky to a brilliant blue, leaving behind puddles that reflected the sunshine like scattered mirrors across the fairgrounds. By 9 o'clock, trucks and trailers filled the parking areas as families arrived for what had long been the county's most anticipated event of the year. Richard Thompson stood at the center of the main arena, surveying the preparations with the proprietary air of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any gathering. His custom-made boots gleamed despite the mud, his silver belt buckle catching the morning light as he directed workers with imperious gestures. "Make sure that banner is centered properly," he called to a worker struggling with the Thompson Ranch sponsorship sign. "And tell the announcer I'll be making a special statement before the calf roping begins." Behind him, his prized black quarter-horse stallion, Midnight Express, stood impatiently, tossing his head and pawing at the ground. The animal was a perfect reflection of Thompson's approach to horsemanship, impeccably groomed, rigidly trained, and valued primarily as a status symbol rather than a sentient being. At the far end of the fairgrounds, in a quiet corner away from the growing crowds, Elijah prepared Thunder for what would be the stallion's first public appearance since his traumatic experience. The Appaloosa's dappled coat gleamed in the morning sun, his once dull eyes now bright and alert, as Elijah spoke to him in a low, steady voice. "Today will be noisy," Elijah explained, running a soft brush over Thunder's shoulder in long, rhythmic strokes. "Lots of people, lots of smells, but I'll be right beside you the whole time." Thunder's ears flicked forward at Elijah's voice, his breathing synchronized with the young man's calm movements. The transformation in the stallion over the past weeks was remarkable, not just in his willingness to accept human contact, but in the return of his natural curiosity and spirit. Where once his eyes had held only fear and aggression, they now showed awareness, intelligence, and most significantly, trust. Rose arrived with her camera equipment, moving slowly to avoid startling Thunder. "How's he doing with all the commotion?" she asked, keeping her voice soft. "He's nervous," Elijah acknowledged, noting the slight tension in Thunder's muscles. "But he's managing it. We spent most of yesterday just listening to recordings of crowd noise." Rose smiled at this detail, another example of Elijah's meticulous attention to Thunder's psychological needs, rather than merely his physical training. "McKinney's here," she said. "He and my father are finalizing the announcement about the new rehabilitation center." The plan they'd agreed upon was simple. Thompson would publicly announce Thunder's sale to the prestigious McKinney training facility, followed by a demonstration of the stallion's remarkable recovery. McKinney would then reveal his actual intention, not to take Thunder to California, but to establish a new rehabilitation center in Sweetwater with Elijah as the head trainer. In the crowded grandstands, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread throughout the county about the miracle horse and the young man who had reached him through patience rather than force. Local families who had witnessed Elijah's sessions sat alongside curious visitors from neighboring towns, all eager to see the unlikely pair perform. At precisely 11 o'clock, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner of Thompson Ranch and primary sponsor of today's event, Mr. Richard Thompson." The crowd applauded politely as Thompson entered the arena atop Midnight Express, the stallion's black coat gleaming as he executed a perfect collected canter around the perimeter. Thompson raised his hat in acknowledgement, his face set in the practiced smile of a man accustomed to public adoration. "Citizens of Sweetwater," Thompson began after guiding Midnight to the center of the arena, his voice amplified by the microphone system. "I have the pleasure of announcing that Thunder, the Appaloosa stallion from Sanford Ranch that many of you have followed in recent weeks, is officially sold to the prestigious McKinney Training Facility in California." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd, particularly among those who had witnessed Thunder's journey with Elijah. Thompson raised his hand for silence. However, before his departure, Mr. McKinney has requested a special demonstration. So, without further delay, the arena gates opened and Thunder entered, moving freely without halter or lead rope, followed by Elijah walking calmly several steps behind. The contrast between Thompson's formal entrance atop his controlled mount and Elijah's quiet partnership with the unrestrained Thunder was striking. Two philosophies of horsemanship made visible in a single moment. The crowd erupted in applause, many standing to get a better view of the famous stallion whose recovery had captivated the community. Thunder's ears flicked nervously at the sudden noise, his stride faltering momentarily. Elijah remained steady, his presence a constant anchor amid the overwhelming stimuli. "It's okay," he murmured, though Thunder was too far ahead to hear the words. The stallion turned as if he had, circling back to position himself closer to Elijah, seeking security and proximity. Thompson watched from atop Midnight Express, his expression carefully neutral despite the grudging respect he felt witnessing Thunder's transformation. The stallion that had nearly killed several handlers now moved with purpose and awareness, responsive to Elijah's subtle body language rather than physical restraints. It was at this precise moment that fate intervened. The storm that had passed through Sweetwater the previous day had left behind more than puddles. It had weakened a section of the ancient oak tree overhanging the eastern corner of the arena. As a sudden gust of wind swept across the fairgrounds, a massive branch broke free with a sound like a gunshot, crashing onto the metal roof of a nearby equipment shed. The explosive noise echoed through the arena like thunder, the very sound that had been present during the traumatic accident that claimed Thunder's previous owner. Midnight Express reacted instantly, rearing in terror and throwing Thompson violently backward. The rancher crashed against the arena fence, which partially collapsed under the impact. Several support beams gave way, trapping Thompson beneath the splintered wood. Chaos erupted throughout the arena. Other horses spooked at the commotion, some throwing their riders, others bolting in panic. Security personnel rushed toward the collapsed section of fence while spectators screamed and pointed. In the midst of this pandemonium, Thunder stood perfectly still beside Elijah, ears alert but body calm, a stark contrast to the frenzied animals around them. Elijah assessed the situation in seconds, recognizing that Thompson was pinned under debris too heavy for the gathering rescuers to lift easily. Without hesitation, he mounted Thunder in a fluid motion, guiding the stallion directly toward the site of the accident. The crowd gasped collectively, many remembering Thunder's violent reputation, now witnessing him carrying a rider voluntarily for the first time since his trauma. "Stand back," Elijah called to the men struggling with the heavy beams. "Give him room." Thunder remained steady as Elijah dismounted, even as lightning flashed overhead and rain began to fall. Conditions eerily similar to those that had triggered his panic just days before. The stallion's focus remained absolute, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. "We need to lift together," Elijah directed the gathered cowboys, organizing their efforts to free Thompson from the debris. Thunder stood nearby, a calming presence amid the growing storm, while other horses continued to circle the arena in panic. With coordinated effort, they finally managed to extract Thompson, whose face was pale with pain and shock. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and blood seeped through his shirt where broken ribs had punctured skin. "Ambulance is coming, but the access roads flooded from yesterday's storm," someone shouted over the intensifying rain. Elijah turned to Thunder, placing a hand gently on the stallion's rain-slicked neck. No words were exchanged, but a decision seemed to pass between them. With careful movements, Elijah helped position Thompson across Thunder's back, creating a makeshift transport that would be faster and gentler than carrying the injured man manually across the muddy grounds. "No," Thompson protested weakly, recognizing through his pain the irony of being rescued by the horse he had dismissed as dangerous and the young man he had marginalized. "He won't carry me." "He will," Elijah said simply, guiding Thunder with the lightest touch toward the medical station at the fairground entrance. The crowd parted as this unlikely procession moved through the storm, the formerly untamable stallion carrying the man who had advocated for his destruction, led by the young stable hand whose methods had been ridiculed. Thunder moved with extraordinary care, his gait smooth and measured to minimize jostling his injured passenger. 1 week later, Thompson lay in his hospital bed, leg elevated in a cast, torso wrapped in bandages that restricted his every movement. The diagnosis had been serious but not life-threatening: broken leg, 4 fractured ribs, concussion, and extensive bruising. The doctors had assured him that with time and physical therapy, he would recover completely. A tentative knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Rose entered first, followed by Elijah and, surprisingly, Gerald McKinney. "I came personally to explain our new partnership," McKinney said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "After seeing Thunder's behavior during the accident, I've completely changed my mind about the purpose of my purchase." Thompson's eyes moved between the 3 visitors, his usual domineering presence diminished by the hospital gown and the vulnerability of his position. "What partnership?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the tube that had been down his throat during surgery. McKinney explained his new vision: not taking Thunder to California, but creating a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses in Sweetwater, with Elijah as the head trainer. "This young man's approach represents the future of equine training," McKinney stated. "I'm willing to fully finance the operation, but we need land. I was hoping we might use that unused parcel of your ranch, with appropriate compensation, of course." Thompson looked at Elijah, then at his daughter, whose eyes silently pleaded for his approval. "He saved my life," Thompson finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "After everything I did, he and that horse saved my life." A week later, Thompson, still recovering from his injuries, received a visit inebriated by Gerald McKinney, the famous trainer from California, who explained, "I came personally to explain our new partnership. After seeing Thunder's behavior during the accident, I've completely changed my mind about the purpose of my purchase." A week later, Thompson, still recovering from his injuries, received a visit from Elijah and Gerald McKinney, the famous trainer from California, who explained, "I came personally to explain our new partnership. After seeing Thunder's behavior during the accident, I've completely changed my mind about the purpose of my purchase." Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his hospital bed, the weight of the cast on his leg a constant reminder of how quickly life could change. Through the window, Texas sunlight streamed in, catching dust motes that danced in the still air. The sterile room with its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell couldn't have been further from the open pastures where he'd built his empire. "Partnership?" Thompson repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. His eyes moved from McKinney to Elijah, who stood quietly near the door, his usual calm presence somehow more pronounced in the clinical setting. "Yes," McKinney continued, pulling his chair closer to the bed. "Instead of taking Thunder to California, I want to invest in creating a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses right here in Sweetwater, with Elijah as the head trainer." Rose, who had been standing by the window, moved closer. "It would be called Second Chance Ranch, Dad. Thompson's gaze lingered on his daughter's face, noting the passion that animated her features, the same expression his wife had worn when fighting for something she believed in. He looked away, staring at the ceiling. The approach this young man has demonstrated represents a paradigm shift in equine therapy, McKinney continued, his weathered hands gesturing emphatically. I've treated hundreds of traumatized horses over my career, but what I witnessed during that storm, Thunder remaining calm while every other horse panicked, that was extraordinary. Elijah finally spoke, his voice soft but clear. Thunder made his own choice, sir. I just gave him the space to make it. The simplicity of the statement hung in the air, challenging decades of Thompson's beliefs about control, power, and the natural order of things. He remembered the feeling of helplessness as he lay trapped beneath the collapsed fence and the surreal sight of the supposedly dangerous stallion carrying him to safety through the chaos. You saved my life, Thompson acknowledged, the words difficult for a man unaccustomed to acknowledging debt. After everything I did to humiliate you, to take Thunder away, you still helped me. It wasn't about you, Elijah replied honestly. It was about doing what was right. Thompson turned to McKinney. What exactly are you proposing? 3 months later, a crisp autumn morning dawned over what had once been the unused north section of Thompson Ranch. The 40 acres now featured newly constructed facilities, a main barn designed with traumatized horses in mind, featuring wider stalls, softer lighting, and acoustic dampening to minimize startling noises. Around it, a series of specially designed paddocks allowed for different stages of rehabilitation, each offering various environmental enrichments. The sign at the entrance read, Second Chance Ranch, Equine Rehabilitation and Therapy Center, in simple, elegant lettering. Beneath it, smaller text acknowledged, a partnership between McKinney Training, Thompson Ranch, and Elijah Walker. Inside the main office, Rose adjusted a framed photograph on the wall. Thunder and Elijah standing together in the sunset, neither restrained by halter or rope, simply choosing each other's company. Next to it hung her veterinary certification, alongside the documentation of the rehabilitation methodology she and Elijah had been developing. The first group arrives tomorrow, she said to Elijah, who was reviewing files at the desk. 3 horses from that neglect case in Houston, plus the jumper with PTSD from the trailer accident. Elijah nodded, studying the case histories. Each animal represented a unique constellation of trauma, fear, and broken trust, much like Thunder had 3 months earlier. The stallion now occupied a special paddock connected to the main facilities, serving both as the program's inspiration and, unexpectedly, as an assistant of sorts. They had discovered that his calm presence often helped other traumatized horses regulate their own emotions. Thunder's been restless this morning, Elijah noted, glancing out the window toward the paddock where the Appaloosa paced along the fence line. I think he senses the changes coming. Rose smiled. Like you, he's sensitive to energy shifts. It's what makes you both so good at this work. The sound of truck tires on gravel drew their attention. Through the window they watched as Richard Thompson's vehicle pulled up to the main entrance. He emerged slowly, leaning heavily on a cane, his movement still stiff from the healing bones, but his determination evident in every step. Checking up on his investment, Rose suggested, though without the bitterness that would have colored such a comment months earlier. I think it's more than that, Elijah replied. Thompson had changed since the accident. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. He hadn't become a different person overnight. Rather, like erosion reshaping stone, his experience had worn away certain hardened edges, revealing something more vulnerable beneath the surface. His recovery had been difficult. Physical therapy sessions left him exhausted and irritable, the dependency on others a constant assault on his self-image. Yet something fundamental had shifted in his worldview. Perhaps it was the humbling experience of being rescued by those he'd dismissed, or perhaps it was simply the reminder of his own mortality. Whatever the cause, Thompson now observed Elijah's work with quiet curiosity rather than scorn. Morning, Thompson greeted them as he entered the office, his eyes taking in the organized space with evident approval. Place is coming together nicely. Just in time for our first clients, Rose confirmed, offering her father coffee from the pot they'd brewed earlier. Thompson accepted the cup, then turned to Elijah. McKinney called yesterday. Said 2 more ranches in Oklahoma have inquired about rehabilitation services. Word spreading, Elijah acknowledged. People are looking for alternatives to traditional methods, especially for horses that haven't responded well. Thompson nodded, a hint of his old skepticism flickering across his features before resolving into something more contemplative. Thought I'd observe today, if that's all right. Like to see how Thunder's doing. They walked together to Thunder's paddock, Thompson's cane creating a rhythmic punctuation to their footsteps. The stallion noticed their approach immediately, trotting to the fence with ears pricked forward, a far cry from the defensive posture he'd maintained during his early days at Sanford Ranch. "Hello, old friend," Elijah greeted softly. Thunder extended his neck over the fence, nostrils flaring gently as he investigated their scents. His dark eyes, once wild with fear, now held the clear awareness of an animal secure in his surroundings. Thompson watched the interaction with undisguised fascination. "Still no halter?" he asked, noting the absence of any restraint. "No need," Elijah explained. "He chooses to stay, chooses to interact. That freedom makes everything else possible." As if demonstrating this principle, Thunder backed away from the fence and trotted to the center of the paddock, then turned and looked expectantly at Elijah. "He wants to show off," Rose laughed. "He knows we're talking about him." Elijah opened the gate and entered the paddock, leaving Thompson and Rose outside. Thunder approached him with the greeting they'd developed, a gentle press of his forehead against Elijah's chest, a moment of shared breath. Then, without any visible cue that Thompson could discern, the stallion positioned himself alongside Elijah, clearly inviting him to mount. In one fluid motion, Elijah swung onto Thunder's bare back. The stallion remained perfectly still until Elijah settled, then began a smooth walk around the paddock that gradually transitioned into a floating trot. There were no reins, no bit, no spurs, just the subtle shifts in Elijah's weight and the occasional quiet word guiding their movement. "I've been training horses for 40 years, Thompson said quietly to Rose, "and I've never seen anything like this. Not just the riding without tack, plenty can do that with the right horse. It's the relationship. They move like one being." "That's exactly what our program teaches," Rose explained. "Not dominance or submission, but partnership. The horses learn that humans can be trusted to respect their needs and boundaries." As the autumn weeks passed, Second Chance Ranch quickly established its reputation. The first group of traumatized horses showed remarkable progress under the program Elijah and Rose had developed. Local children with special needs began visiting for therapeutic sessions, their parents reporting significant improvements in emotional regulation and confidence. McKinney's investment proved prescient as inquiries came from across the Southwest. By late November, they had expanded their staff to include 2 additional trainers who were learning Elijah's methods, as well as a full-time therapist specializing in equine-assisted mental health services. Thompson became a regular visitor, initially claiming he was simply checking on his business interest, but increasingly engaged in genuine observation of the rehabilitation process. He would sit quietly for hours, watching Elijah work with new arrivals, horses that arrived terrified, aggressive, or shut down from various traumas, gradually opening to the possibility of trust again. On a golden afternoon in early December, a reporter from Equestrian Life magazine arrived to interview Elijah for a feature article. Thompson watched from the porch of the main building as the woman followed Elijah around the facility, her recorder capturing his soft-spoken explanations while her photographer documented the remarkable interactions between formerly dangerous horses and their human partners. "What would you say is the secret of your method?" the reporter asked, as they observed Thunder gently interacting with a child in a wheelchair, the stallion's head lowered to the exact height needed for small hands to reach his velvety muzzle. Elijah smiled, watching the majestic Appaloosa, who had once been considered too dangerous to approach. "There is no secret," he replied. "Just the understanding that pain recognizes pain, and that healing begins when we stop trying to dominate and start listening." thunder has taught me as much as I've taught him." From his vantage point on the porch, Thompson observed the scene, a cup of coffee warming his hands against the December chill. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair and highlighted the new lines etched around his eyes, not just from age and pain, but from a different kind of seeing. His face bore not only the physical scars from the accident, but something deeper, the expression of a man who finally perceived value in something beyond power and control. As the sun began its early winter descent, Elijah mounted Thunder without saddle or bridle, and together they galloped across the open fields of Second Chance Ranch, not as master and animal, but as two survivors who, through mutual respect and understanding, had found their way back to life.